All right. Welcome to the HelpSystems webinar today. And topic we're discussing is the latest data encryption trends and what they mean for IBMI. So we'll explore that a little bit, but first introduce ourselves. We're host today. My name is Sandi Moore. I'm Principal Security Consultant with HelpSystems. I've been working on IBMI for a few years and have played a lot of different roles. And security is definitely one of my passions. I actually get pretty excited when I see a system that I can help with. So with me is my colleague, Chuck Losinski. Why don't you introduce yourself, Chuck?
Thanks, Sandy. Been a pleasure working with you these many years. I am Director of Technical Solutions here at HelpSystems, work primarily around IBMI in terms of automation and security tools, and spent most of my career on IBMI, and really a great pleasure to be here talking about encryption.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. I'm glad you're here too. You always have some good insight. So HelpSystems are, as a company, I don't know if you're familiar with us or not, most of the people on the call I think are, but we've actually made a big investment in security, and we present that with our Powertech security products. They are globally recognized and have a very strong reputation as being top of the line. We also provide comprehensive IBMI and AIX security services. So not only can we provide applications that will help to get the system to a more secure state on IBMI, but we also have services that can back that up, whether it's remediation or architecture projects. We'll be able to help with that. We have a lot of input into as well the security standards on for PCI. We're on a member of the council, so staying on top of that is a very important piece of that, to know what's happening in the industry and what security initiatives are coming down the line. And so we're prepared to assist with that as well. We do also do NASBA CPE credits for education. So we get some auditors in there once in a while, accountants that need to have those CPE credits, and that can help add to that. And of course, our biggest claim to fame there is the being the publisher of the annual State of IBMI Security Study. We've actually been doing that since 2003, and it is actually used by many other entities to show where security is at on IBMI. We're very passionate about the platform, and we are definitely proponents of keeping the platform up to date and making sure that we are assisting with that. Big part of that is securing it, making sure that it's not having any issues that are going to, be an embarrassment or be a problem in the industries.
Sandy, where can they find that State of the IBMI Security Study?
On our website. You can download it, and it's very interesting. We do a webinar on that every year as well. So if you wanted to go back and look at what we found for this last year, Robin Tainen and I presented that. It is available on our website to watch on demand as well. So you can get the kind of the Cliff Notes version of the study by just watching that webinar.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
So I think we should kick things off here. When we were talking about this, I was trying to decide what order to put the presentation together. And usually we start with telling you about how encryption works and all of that, but I think I actually decided to start more with the mandates that require data encryption, why you guys are here today, why you feel the need to learn more about encryption and its impact on IBMI. And, when it comes down to it, it's not just something that companies add on because they just want to. It's typically because you have some requirements that are mandating that you add encryption and protecting that data at rest on your system, whether it's GDPR, PCI DSS, HIPAA. Those are three of the biggest, most widely known requirements that actually specifically call out encryption for protecting the data on the system. GDPR is actually pretty far reaching. If you do business with a customer in the EU, this data protection requirement is going to impact you. And they clearly call out, when they talk about security of processing data, is that the personal data needs to be encrypted. And it actually will give you, in the event of a breach, if that data is encrypted, you don't necessarily have to actually disclose it to the victims of that breach. If that data is not compromised because it's encrypted, you're actually in pretty good shape there. So it does help not only to meet the requirements, but to also reduce the work you have to do after some exposure to actually notify those data subjects. When it comes down to PCI DSS and encryption, they also specifically call out the encryption requirements in the 3.3 and 3.4. It is addressed specifically as to what you can display to non-authorized users and how you should be encrypting the data with strong cryptography and making sure that you have key management processes and procedures in place for that. So really being able to not only encrypt the data, but you also have to have a good tool that's actually doing it. And you have to be able to manage those keys, and you have to be able to control who has access to it. So it's not that easy to just go ahead and just create your own encryption. You have to have the components with it that make it work. When we look at HIPAA and encryption, again, it actually specifically calls out that you have to implement a mechanism to encrypt and decrypt that ePHI, so that electronic personal health information should be encrypted. So it really does come down to what kind of data you have on the system. If you have anything that would be, and you fall under that HIPAA, that information has to be encrypted. So finding it, identifying it, and then making sure that you've got that mechanism in place for that automated encryption. Of course, that's not all. We, touch on the biggest three that I think most people have heard of. New York has their own Department of Finance cybersecurity regulations that they've actually introduced. It's been a couple of years, I think, since that came out. But again, it specifically calls out for non-public information that it needs to have controls over it, including encryption. And not only encryption for the data at rest, but when it's actually in transit. So their expectation is that you're going to have that data at rest encrypted, and you are going to make sure that it is encrypted when you're sending it anywhere else off that server that it's stored on. So this is unfortunately not going away. This is just a handful of those that are actually now requiring it. If you work with any ACH transactions, NACHA, which actually governs the ACH transactions, they set the rules and the policies around the payment systems and set the standards. They are actually rolling out encryption requirements as well. And we've actually heard from a couple customers that said, hey, we're facing this, whether you're facing it in June, you face it this June of this year. If you had over 6 million transactions per year in 2019, you have to start making that data unreadable when it's stored electronically. So data at rest needs to be unreadable to unauthorized users. And they're actually going to phase it in for smaller shops. So if you're not at that 6 million mark, watch for that coming in June of 2022. You're going to need to be encrypting that data as well. So, it all comes down to, we all have a lot of sensitive information on our system, and we have to protect it, and they're not going to make it optional anymore. This is something that is definitely coming up. California has Privacy Act as well. A lot of these aren't enforceable at this point. There may not be any penalties with it, so maybe there's not as much incentive to meet these requirements. If you're privately held, you may not have those requirements. You should have a security policy, though, that actually holds you to some sort of standard, and that should include protecting that sensitive data. A lot of people are moving towards cyber insurance and getting policies that is going to help them in the event of a breach to make up for losses, financial losses. But you have to read those contracts carefully, because they are starting to require specifically that encryption is in place and protecting that sensitive data. So if you have a breach, they want to make sure that you've actually done everything you can to protect that information. And reading that fine print closely, making sure you know what they're expecting, because if you're not meeting the minimum requirements, they may not pay out on a claim. So you have to make sure that you've actually put those preventative measures in place. Encryption is a key component of that. So what does it mean for IBMI? So we've got these great systems, they're stable platforms. Concerns are that the databases themselves can be accessed through a wide variety of tools. So whether it's external hackers, rogue employees, or one of those two that has access to one of your good employees' access to the system. Those databases can be accessed through command lines, SQL, DFU, database tools, query, ODBC, JDBC, and client access. So the information is widely available. If you have user credentials, you can get to the system. Most cases, you could be able to get to all that information. And I like to remind people that read authority equals exposure. So if you've secured the database file so that they can't change it, great. But if they can read it, it can be exposed. Backups are another concern. Backup media is very often passed through hands to different offsite storage locations. And if that data the tape is lost or DVD, or if you are actually transmitting it electronically, if that data that's being sent is sensitive and it is not encrypted, whoever can see that and gets a hold of that is going to have that information. So we have to be concerned about the way the data is being consumed, who's consuming it, and what they can actually get to and see. Now, that's not the only problem. Ransomware has a big impact on IBMI data. We tend to think of this as a PC issue and that this is not an IBMI issue. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Through the process of ransomware, one of the key components that they are actually employing at this point to actually get victims, I should say victims to pay up is to exfiltrate the data. And while that ransomware is in your environment and they are exfiltrating data before they actually trigger that attack, that data's left the system. So if that data is in the clear and it's sensitive, it's going to be held hostage and you're going to need to pay for it. If you do not pay, they're going to expose it. So making sure that you actually encrypt that data is going to take away the ability for that to be held hostage. So a big component here. So whatever of those different requirements that I talked about that may not apply to you, this applies to everybody. You have to be considering that information. All right. Encrypting the IBMI data is possible. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not impossible. You have to, of course, consider the amount of effort that's going to be involved there. It is actually a lot easier than you think, and we'll have Chuck show us some information as well. And you can actually prove you're in compliance. So if you do have one of those requirements, you can actually show this information is encrypted, this is who has access to it, and this is who does not have access to see that sensitive information. But you have to make sure that you understand that not all encryption solutions are created equal. So there are definitely some considerations that you need to keep in mind, and we'll address that. Let's talk about the basics of encryption. What kind of data needs protection? So when we're looking at the system, doing an inventory of your system is critical. Finding out what's on the server. A lot of these servers have been around for a very long time. So there's information on there that you might have forgotten about, that you may never have looked at because you have only worked for the company for 5 years, but the system's been around for 20. Whether you have PCI data, PII data, social security numbers, date of birth, the PHI information, we talked about health-related information, bank account numbers. A routing number and a bank account number together is a problem. Routing numbers are publicly available, but once you get that bank account number with that, that's a concern. User IDs and passwords. We've seen that come up recently, haven't we, Chuck? User ID and passwords stored on an IBMI in clear text. That could not be a problem. PIN numbers, payroll information, so your employees' information, that can also be PII data as well. But pay, PTO, bonus plans, anything like that, if it's stored on that server, that could be sensitive. Driver's license number, financial data. So your company financial data, would that be considered sensitive? If you're publicly traded, no, but privately held companies, you probably don't want everybody knowing your business. trade secrets, product formulas, cost of your widgets, cost of the ingredients. All of that information could be a problem if it was provided to your competitors. Basically when it comes down to it, anything that you would deem confidential to your organization, its employees and your customers should be considered data worth protecting. Okay, that's the important piece of that there. So what about encryption by the good guys? So here's the thing. If the bad guys are encrypting your data, there's not a lot we're going to be able to do with that. If they've encrypted it, hopefully you've got some good backups and you've got a good solid plan for recovery. But encrypting it by the good guys is you, and you're going to be able to encode that information, protect it from unauthorized access. And so with that encryption, you're hiding the meaning of the message, but the data still exists in its form. It's just you've now actually ciphered it so that anyone who doesn't have the key to decrypt it won't be able to read it. And so really taking that encryption with the key and being able to use it again. So getting it in and out is a very big piece of the puzzle there for protecting it, but also being able to use it. Now, when we talk about strong encryption, this actually changes over time. So it really depends at what point in time you were required to do strong encryption. The strength of the encryption method can be influenced by a number of components: the choice of your algorithm, the length of the key, and the secrecy of the key. Who knows about it? How long was that key? Was it randomly generated or was it a passphrase based? You have to be careful with passphrase based encryption keys because they develop a pattern and they will end up being decoded. So think about the Enigma machine and how in World War II we were able to break the Nazi encryption was because they ended every message with a phrase, the Heil Hitler at the end. So once we got a hold of their machine for the encryption, we grabbed onto the fact that there was the same thing at the end of every encrypted message. That gave us the ability to decode it. So that strong encryption is very important in not having anything that is predictable. So recommendation there is to use industry standard encryption standards, AS256, and then utilize those sufficiently strong keys. So big piece of that. All right, so let's talk about modern IBM encryption. Chuck, I think this is where you shine.
You bet. And Sandi, should we pop up a polling question here?
Yes, let's do the poll.
Dive into the technology. So
absolutely.
Okay, so here's the polling question. Have you done a data inventory on your system? So Sandi's been talking about that sensitive data that you most likely have in your database. And so have you identified what needs to be protected? All right, make your choice and go ahead and submit that, and we will share the results. And
so
we can see the results behind the scenes. Look at that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and data inventories can be an easy process. We even have a free tool you can use to look for patterns in data and be able to find credit card numbers, social security numbers, that kind of thing. So really knowing what's on the system, if you want to be an ostrich and hide your head in the sand and not know what's there, I guess, you don't want to have any requirements applied to you. But I think that when it comes down to it, we all want to do a good job, and this is a piece of that. So making sure you know what's on your system. All right, so how many people voted here? Hey, everybody's been responding.
Yeah, and everybody who responded to the positive that they have done a data inventory. Looks like many have data that needs to be protected, and some have an urgent need to protect the data. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the background technology that's built into the operating system that will allow us to help you get your data encrypted. And we're talking about encrypting data at the DB2 field level. All right. The background technology that is incorporated into the operating system is called a field procedure. And we call it a non-invasive procedure because there should be little or no programming changes required in your application. All right, this field procedure technology is integrated into the operating system. And let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so the field procedure was released in 7.1 of the operating system. So this is not bleeding edge technology. It's been around for a while. And basically the field procedure is a database exit at the DB2 field level. And what we do is we leverage that exit program or that field procedure then to call our encryption process to use strong encryption methods to encrypt the data at rest. And then likewise, that same field procedure program will be called when the data is accessed. No matter what the protocol, we still have to work through that field procedure to decrypt the data. And it's there where the magic happens, where the authentication method that we have in our product will determine who can actually read the data. The field procedure supports multi-member files, so if you do have multi-member files in your database, we can work with those as well. And the technology also works with both DDS and DDL described files or tables on your system. And then, of course, if there's logicals involved, the re-indexing takes place automatically with field procedures. Okay. So what does the flow look like? So as data is added, whether it's one record at a time through an interactive process or through a batch process, the data works through the encryption methodology through the field procedure program. So whichever fields are deemed important to protect, the field procedure has been applied to that field. When the data is added, it is then encrypted or encoded into the database. So at rest, it will be encrypted. And then likewise, when a read takes place, that same field procedure program will need to be called. And it's there where, again, I mentioned that the magic takes place. Authority checking takes place at the field level, and we can go through either the display of the data or the output of the data to a print file, a display file, an SQL request, or whatnot. And depending on the authority that the requesting user has, you'll either see clear text data or you'll see fully masked data. So in other words, you're not authorized to see it, or potentially partially masked if you have assigned a mask to that particular field. All right, so how do we go about adding a field procedure? In the product, when you add a field procedure, an alter table statement takes place. All right, and when that happens, there can be no other locks on the table or the file. A batch process is submitted, and what happens is the operating system basically creates a shadow file behind the scenes. All the data is copied from the original production file into that shadow file, and on the way, for those fields that have a field procedure applied to them, the field procedure program will be called and the data will be encrypted. Likewise, when the batch encryption process is complete, that shadow file in the background is put in the place of the production file. And the great thing is that file levels don't change, so you won't get any level checks when those fields or those tables are used in your programs. But it does take some time to do the initial encryption. And then from then on, the adds and changes and et cetera just will work through the field procedures. There's no batch process that's required.
Fantastic.
All right. All right. So what are the encoding events or the events that will trigger an encryption of data? So any record level access. So if it's a read and a change, or if it's an SQL insert or update, could be a copy file, could be through a DFU process or a query process, et cetera. all those are encoding events. So those are events that will cause data to be encrypted into the database. So it could be a change or an add process. Now, likewise, a decryption or a decoding event is any read or any chain in your program or an SQL type or query event. Various report writer technologies such as Showcase or SQL in our product line, or likewise any other JDBC activity that takes place, all those will work through that decoding process. Actually, about the only time that the data is not decrypted is in a save process. So a save object or a save lib, the field encryption process or the exit program at the field level will not be called. And that's exactly how you want it to behave. You don't want the field procedure to be called when the data is stored out to a tape or a save file, because that would defeat the purpose. You want it encrypted at rest.
I think what's really cool with the field procedures check is that they're application agnostic. It doesn't matter how you get at the data, or input the data. When it goes in, that field procedure program is called and that data is taken care of. So
Yeah.
there's no backdoors. People don't get to, they don't get to get around that, no matter how they're doing it.
Sandi, why not just write a field procedure program yourself?
No, thank you.
Yeah, it is a difficult and time-consuming process. So ultimately, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to create a whole infrastructure around that field procedure. So you're going to have to generate keys. You're going to have to figure out a way to define authorization at the field level. You're going to have to think about masking, because you can't just put a alphanumeric character into a numeric field. Your display programs, your output programs will simply blow up at that point. All right. Also, key management, you got to think about things like key rotation and re-encrypting the data. How about your audit trail? So as fields are encrypted and accesses take place and keys are rotated, and let's say data is saved off to tape, 5 years later, you want to use that data again. Are your keys still in existence? It's a lot of work to create your own field procedure program to do encryption and decryption. And you know what? If you're going to do it yourself and your programmers are going to do it, guess what? There goes your separation of duties. Who knows? There might be a backdoor that they put into place.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that if you had an auditor and you had audit requirements, they're not really going to be pleased that this is done internally and that you've got some exposures that way. So
exactly.
What do we do then, Chuck?
Well, let's talk about field level encryption in the Powertech Encryption for IBMI. The flow is exactly as we spoke of before, whereas data is added or changed, it works through the field procedure program on each individual field that gets encrypted, so that on the way into the database, the data will be encrypted at rest. And then on the way out, whether it's an interactive process, a batch process, an SQL request internally or JDBC, all those protocols have to work through that field level exit program, which we call a field procedure. So what Powertech Encryption does for you is it mechanizes all those activities for you. So when you identify the fields that need to be encrypted, you tell us what data encryption keys you want to use. We will generate those for you. We will take care of the batch encryption process. We will take care of defining or helping you define who should be authorized to those fields. And by the way, that can be a service profile, an individual profile, a group profile, and so forth. We'll manage the key rotation. And then any auditing of field procedure changes, of encryption and decryption activity, all that goes into our audit trail so that you have a nice tight package. All right. Okay, so a couple things about the setup of Powertech Encryption. So when that field procedure is called at the field level, the first thing we look at is a global policy setting. All right. So it says here, PCI dual control, separation of duties, and so forth. And we have a global setting that will block all object authority as well. So if you have all object authority users on your system, be they programmers or administrators, we can block those as well because that's a global setting in the Powertech Encryption tool. All right, we take care of the key management, so we will randomly generate a key for you. We will use that key for AES-256 encryption, and we'll manage that key through its life cycle, including as you rotate through keys, we will keep that key in place so that if you have to restore data from 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, we still know how to decrypt that. All right. The authority at the field level is defined by authorization lists. So when the field is active, we actually use an IBM authorization method, the authorization list, to determine who should be able to access that data, either fully decrypted or possibly masked. Also, Powertech Encryption allows for IFS encryption, so you can identify a directory that needs to be encrypted. We'll encrypt the contents of the directory. It's not like a field procedure because we can't partially encrypt an IFS stream file, so it's all or nothing for an IFS directory. And likewise, if you don't have anything for a backup encryption, we do have a backup encryption methodology as well to encrypt your data as it's sent out to tape or virtual tape.
You know, Chuck, I had a customer who actually had to send their production data to their vendor because they were having some issues and they needed to do some testing, and they actually used the backup encryption. They encrypted it, the save, and before they sent that tape by FedEx. So, you know, a lot of different use cases for that.
Yeah. So it's and so encrypting your data is a project, and one of the ways that you can keep track of your encryption project is to use a dashboard. So here is an example dashboard using our Insight technology. This is browser technology that interfaces with a number of our products. That you can see robot schedule menu options listed on the left-hand side. But what we're looking at here is an encryption dashboard, a Powertech Encryption for IBMI dashboard that lists audit trail information. You can print that out, by the way, of course. It lists number of fields that have been encrypted, how many full decryptions, mass decryptions, authority error, IFS errors, and so forth that you've seen. All right, so we can help you build out a dashboard to fit your needs using the free technology from HelpSystems called Insight, and that's free if you're licensed to one of the supported products or data sources that Insight uses.
Yeah, and it's nice to have that at your fingertips, just be able to pull up that browser window and see a quick overview of where you're at.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see if let's share the other screen. There we go. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to look at is a database that's been encrypted using the Powertech Encryption tool. And we're not going to go through all the setup processes, but I'd like to show you some of the output. All right. So first of all, let's start with an SQL statement. All right. So I'm just selecting all the data from my CR demo 4 CDPCM file. All right. So you can see that my customer number field, I'm not authorized to that. My credit card, I'm authorized only in a masked version. Social security number, again, masked. Notice how between the credit card number and the social security number, my masking is slightly different. My credit card number, because it's an alphanumeric field, I can use an alphanumeric character for masking. For my social security number, because that's a numeric field, I have to use numeric characters for the masking value as well as the not authorized value. All right. And when we set up the encryption for any particular field, we can identify what field type it is, and we only allow those certain characters to be displayed as a not authorized or a masked value. All right, if it's just a RPG program, maybe doing a subfile display, notice the same exact masking has taken place. So I did not make any changes to my RPG program to make this data displayable in this format. It used the field procedures behind the scenes. All right, so let's see what that looks like. Display file field description, CR demo for CD PCM. All right, so this is my table that I have encrypted. And so just for instance, at the credit card field level here, it says that there's a field procedure defined calling CRRP007. That is the Powertech encryption process. So every field that it will be encrypted will have this field procedure applied to it. So that's probably something that you've never seen before, a field procedure being applied to a IBMI table. So let's do this again. Let's use a JDBC connection.
Yeah, because not everybody uses green screen, Chuck.
Right, yeah.
I'm a green screen fan, but yeah.
Yeah, let's say you're using a query tool, an external report writer tool. In this case, I'm just using ACS and the run SQL script. I'm selecting all the data from my table. All right. Oh, and of course, I think, let's reconnect. That might help. There we go. Little timeout.
Little timeout.
Well, Sandy, live demo.
I know. This is live
All
TV,
right.
folks. So looks like there's a problem with your statement there.
Yeah. Sandy, I'll let you take off, and I'll debug that while you continue on.
Absolutely. All right. So let me share my screen again.
All right. There you go. You're the presenter.
Okay. So, all right. So thank you for the demo, Chuck. I think it's really valuable that regardless of how the users are accessing the system, through whatever interface they have, that they are not going to be able to get around the masking that you've put in place. So those all object users aren't going to be able to take advantage of that. Very powerful for showing auditors, but also whether it's an internal or external auditor. So there's some key considerations that you need to keep in mind when you're choosing an encryption solution. Of course, whatever your compliance requirements are, whether it's that internal security policy, or if you fell under one of those mandates that we talked about at the beginning. And really, those are not going to be friendly to a homegrown solution. So you have to make sure that you are actually using something that has been tested and proven to work. The strength of your encryption method, absolutely a necessity to have the strongest encryption method, and something that will update with the technology changes. So if you wrote something 20 years ago, we're using different technology today. So it's not going to last. So you have to have something that is actually going to be maintained, updated, and keep up with changes in technology. Having that audit trail is always important, so that you have an unalterable record of what's happened and what has been going on with your encryption, who's decrypted, who's removed encryption. And so being able to keep track of that, someone can't hide their tracks. You can't go delete that audit entry. It's in there, it's written in stone. Your implementation time as well. Do you have time for a project to rewrite all of your applications? Probably not. Most of the customers I talk to have a very limited time to be able to do these types of projects. We're all running with really lean shops, and so being able to implement something quickly and efficiently is critical for that. And of course, ease of use, training time. Do you have time for training? Training's available, but really having something that is intuitive and easy to set up. And so really that's where the Powertech encryption for IBMI comes in. And it's just a piece of our powerful security suite that we provide. And, it's that one where you've got the encryption. And I have to mention too, the secure managed file transfer. So using that same encryption technology for any that data that's in motion. And, this is really just a piece of the pie that you need to consider. But, depending on the data and what your requirements are, it may be something that needs to move to the top of your priority list. And having that full suite as you need, adding components that can add to your plan and to the security of the system is what we're trying to provide you. Now, when you're starting out, one thing that you can actually start with, and I actually just got done with one of these this morning, is a vulnerability assessment. So we have a free tool, it's called a security scan, that you can actually use to get a security snapshot of your system. So you can actually get some ideas on really how exposed are you. And we've always assumed that IBM is a secure platform, but it's really, by default, it's not. It is highly secureable. So you can add components, change some settings to actually get the system to a more secure state. So this will give you some insight to that. And we like to think of it as a planning tool to really get the exposure to see what's going on your system. And of course, it's free. Everybody loves free. And there's been some commercials, free, free, free. So really being able to get a picture in Technicolor, unfortunately, it always starts out with a lot of red, but not to be afraid of it. It's really about figuring out what you've got going on the system and then taking it from there. All right.
That's awesome. Can I show JDBC connection now?
Absolutely. It looks like there was a typo in that select statement.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Perfect. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So here's a sample JDBC SQL request. Looking at that CDPCM file, working through those field procedures like I described them as a exit program at the database field level. Doesn't matter the protocol, they do have to work through that technology.
Yeah.
All right. So Sandi, we've got another polling question. Let me bring that up.
Awesome.
Stop sharing. Can you see the polling question?
Yes, I can.
All right. Great. So Sandi, how long, if somebody wants to do a proof of concept using the Powertech encryption for IBM, how long would a proof of concept take?
Well, we do a lot of those. I'd say about an hour we can have the software set up and a field encrypted. I actually did one the other day and it took us about 45 minutes. So, it's definitely something for production. It's going to take some planning and making sure you know what data you need to protect and who's going to be able to see what version of it. But really getting an idea of how it's going to behave on your system is actually a pretty easy process and doesn't take a whole lot of time. Demo of it, we do those all day long too, and those are going to be 30, 45, maybe an hour if you've got a lot of questions. Some people like to ask questions and I appreciate those. So definitely worth giving it a test drive to see how it's going to assist you in your environment and being able to actually be able to protect that data, meet those requirements you guys have on your environment. And of course, starting with that, so you've got the security scan and then running into looking at the encryption tool itself. So, all right. So I think we covered everything. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post those in the questions panel and see what is going on there. Chuck, looks like we've got one here that is asking about encryption and HA. So if the data is replicated, what happens over on that HA side?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So wherever the data is being replicated to, if the data is going to be usable on that target system, the Powertech encryption tooling needs to be on that target as well. The great thing about remote journal entries is that they are also encrypted. So it's another way that data is sitting at rest, and the journal receiver entries also have to work through the field procedure technology. So when that data is received on the target system in the journal receiver, it is re-encrypted and placed into the database there, encrypted. So anytime that data needs to be accessed, it has to work through the field procedure.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think people forget that with these HA systems, these backup and DR systems, the data's still sensitive. It's sitting over there, so you still need to protect it on those other servers as well. You know, every once in a while you hear that, oh, I use my production data in test, but it's old. Well, the data is still sensitive, it's just not fresh. And so again, still needs to be protected.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'm going to stop recording here unless we had any other questions. Do you see any other questions there, Chuck, that we need to address online? Otherwise, we can take them offline and follow up later on.
No questions. If you do have any, additional questions, certainly you can contact us after the webinar. We'd love to do a one-on-one demonstration for you, and certainly if you're interested in doing a proof of concept, we'd be happy to do that. And of course, there's always additional information on our website.
Yep. Yeah, and definitely if you're go out and look at, we've got some webinars out there, recorded webinars you can look at. Security study is available, and we'd be happy to talk with you. All right, Chuck.
Well, Sandy, thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to working with you on more encryption projects.
Yeah.